Well, howdy there, people. It's V again. Today we're going to talk about Beau of the Fifth Column and his relationship with Antifa. For a long time, because I actually used to follow his channel because sometimes he's got a lot of smart stuff on it, but it kind of eventually started to make me wonder. I was kind of concerned that what I was looking at was somebody who's pretty good at weaving smart stuff in with their actual agenda in such a way that slowly radicalizes people. And that's exactly what's going on. He doesn't do this as brazenly in his videos as you might expect, but on Twitter a couple of times I've had some exchanges with him that led me to that conclusion, especially when he started openly, showing support for Antifa and making excuses for them. So I had an argument with him on Twitter today. I'm going to use screenshots, but I'll also provide a link to the conversation so that you can look at it because I think people should read this and really get to know that this guy is probably not what you think. And in some ways, it was always kind of intended that way. But before I get into that, let's talk a little bit about who this guy is. This was taken from a report that was on the Defamation League. But anyway, bottom line up front, according to a joint report by the Anti-Defamation League and Moonshot, a recent project aimed at preventing right-wing violent extremists violence ran a nationwide redirect method campaign to provide users demonstrating interest in extremist violence with credible alternative content. However, thousands of users were redirected to a convicted felon and disinformation amplifier who espouses violent anti-Semitic, anti-cop, and anarchistic views. According to a joint report by Moonshot CVE in partnership with the Anti-Defamation League in an effort to counter election-related violence and disinformation from September to December 2020, thousands of individuals who searched online for violent extremist material were redirected to a nonviolent content that exposed falsehoods of extremist narratives. Moonshot CVE developed this technological method to direct users attempting to access extremist materials in partnership with Jigsaw, a Google-owned entity, in 2016. The report outlines the user's escalation journey when an individual performed a Google search that expressed interest in a violent group narrative, ideology, or action. Moonshot redirected the user to a safe alternative. According to the report, Moonshot collaborated with subject matter experts to curate playlists of pre-existing content available on YouTube. De-escalation the user journey. According to the report, users interested in armed groups were redirected to this 11-minute video from a southern gun owner. He addresses why armed black men are profiled by the police and the need for rural whites and minority groups to work together peacefully. While the face is blurred in the report, the individual can easily be identified as YouTube personality Beau of the Fifth Column. According to Oxford Languages, a fifth column is a group within a country at war who are sympathetic to or working for its enemies. Beau of the Fifth Column. The influencer's name is not Beau, it is Justin King, a Southern anarchist. Justin King was convicted of visa fraud and alien smuggling conspiracy charges, along with 3 co-conspirators who are all Russian nationals. Let's take a look. Department of Justice. Florida man convicted of visa fraud and alien smuggling conspiracy charges. Washington. A Florida man has been convicted on 7 counts of visa fraud and alien smuggling for his role in bringing aliens to work at major hotels and resorts in Destin, Florida. In the Destin, Florida area. Assistant Attorney General Alice S. Fisher of the Criminal Division and the U.S. Attorney Gregory R. Miller of the Northern District of Florida announced today. Justin King, 27, of Chipley, Florida, was convicted following a 6-day trial and in the Northern District of Florida, Pensacola, of 1 count of conspiracy to commit visa fraud, 5 counts of visa fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit alien smuggling. Evidence presented to the jury showed that the conspiracy began as early as 1999 and escalated in 2003 when King's co-conspirators successfully brought in more than 200 aliens to work as hotel housekeepers using fraudulent visas. King joined the conspiracy in 2005 and created the mailed fraudulent visa applications seeking more than 15,000 additional aliens. Foreigners can apply for non-immigrant visas called HT-B visas that permit them to come to the United States and temporarily work as unskilled laborers for a specific employer if there are no local U.S. workers available for hire. Evidence presented during the trial showed that in some instances, the defendant and his co-conspirators had submitted visa petitions seeking to bring in substantially more alien workers than what the client hotels had contracted for or needed. In other instances, the defendant and his co-conspirators used the forged letterhead of hotels to further their scam. Most of the alien workers brought in through the fraudulent visa scheme were contracted out to hotels and resorts other than those listed on their visa. According to the evidence, when the government became aware of the illegal conduct and stopped issuing visas petitioned by the labor contracting entity King and his co-conspirators were using, Eurohouse Holding Corporation, they created a new labor contracting corporation called Woland and continued their fraudulent activity. King faces a maximum of 5 years in prison on the visa fraud conspiracy charge. The visa fraud and the alien smuggling conspiracy counts each carry a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison and a fine of $250,000. The government is also seeking forfeiture of $3.2 million from the 4 defendants involved in this matter. Senior U.S. District Judge Lacey A. Collier set sentencing for February 12, 2008. King's 3 co-conspirators, Anna Cesarin, I'm not going to say that right, 57, Alexander Berman, 38, and Vyacheslav Adalovich Finkel, also known as Stan, 45, had previously pleaded guilty and testified against King. The 3 await sentencing. The investigation of the case began in late 2005. The indictment resulted from joint investigation by Okalasa County Sheriff's Office, the U.S. Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service, and the Department of Labor's Office of Labor Racketeering and Fraud Investigation, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Citizenship and Immigration Service, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement agencies. The case was prosecuted by Assistant U.S. Attorney Tiffany Edges, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, let's go back to what we were reading. According to a document from Florida State University and the Florida State Bar Association on Human Trafficking, there was a high degree of interconnectivity between the companies and strong indicators of organized crime. Well, let's take a look at that too. Florida Strategic Plan on Human Trafficking. Oh, this looks pretty big. I'll link it to you guys and you can check it out, but regardless. So, anyway, after serving his sentence, Justin King faced 25 years and was sentenced to 41 months in prison. After serving his sentence, he created the online persona, Beau, the Fifth Column, which coincided with the website called thefifthcolumnnews.com and the TFC network, which is dedicated to undermining and replacing corporate and government-controlled media. I can't really argue with that, but anyway, the 2 other sites in this network were sleepercell.us and pontiactribune.com. Roughly 15.5% of outbound links on the website link out to Russian websites. Most authors who contribute to the site are also contribute to a broader network of disinformation outlets. Among articles published by the Fifth Column News, how to disable a $600,000 military vehicle for less than $50, Israel requesting over $5 billion in U.S. military aid, more money for genocide. Justin King has also written an open letter to former IDF spokesperson Miri Regev, in which he compares her to later Joseph Goebbels, says Jews are engaging in the same behavior as Nazis, and advocates for Miri Regev's execution. Justin King also published an article, 9 Reasons Why People Kill Cops. Some excerpts, cops that behave like violent thugs die like violent thugs. Nobody cares when traitors die. Justin King has also contributed a number of articles to a known disinformation network called Mint Press News. According to experts, Mint Press News is a disinformation site with opaque funding streams run out of Minneapolis, which aligns with the Kremlin's view of multipolar world and often promotes anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Mint Press News has been reprinting a copy of Russia Today and Sputnik since 2016. Justin has also contributed to an extremely anti-Semitic called Shoah, the Palestinian Holocaust, which refers to Israel and uses terms such as Zio equal Nazi racists. So, kind of a deep dive on just how crazy this dude is. I never really understood all of this before, but it all makes sense now. So let's go over this conversation that I had with him. So to give you a mild amount of background here, I had already kind of called him out about the shooting that had just taken place over in Olympia. And at one point, I mistakenly added the wrong link that showed 3 people being shot in Portland. But anyway, so that conversation there has been going on for quite some time, not really just with him, but with some of his followers. So he decided to pipe in today. You do realize you've spent 3 days debating a fashy flesh wound, right? I'm willing to bet the guy who got shot has thought about it less. And I said, I do realize I spent 3 days exposing lies about this topic. I made one mistake with the wrong link. Everything else I said has been correct, despite you saying I had lied 5 times. I used to follow your content, your channel. Once I figured out you were supporting Antifa, that ended. You said 3 people were shot. You provided a false link to back up that claim. You've literally tried to spin a super minor event for 3 days. And I said, yes, as I just said, I made one mistake. Meanwhile, people in your feed are spreading the spin and lies about Antifa, saying a Proud Boy shot themselves in the foot, which is not true. So then he says, free advice. You're emotionally invested in this for whatever reason. Maybe it isn't healthy to dwell on people who are looking for conflict when they find it. To which I responded, free advice. You are supporting domestic terrorists. Maybe it isn't healthy. What I am dwelling on is people lying about what took place, like the way they tried to spin the stabbing in LA. Or this tanky school teacher who was indoctrinating kids, also Antifa. He says, please lecture me on terrorism. This should be fun. Not all political violence is terrorism. You're using emotionally charged terms because propaganda got to you. You should take a step back. To which I said, I don't need to take a step back. I was Occupy Wall Street when these idiots were breaking shit behind our peaceful marches, and we had to deal with it. Also in his response to the definition of terrorism, I said, Cornell Law School says otherwise. The term domestic terrorism means activities that involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of criminal laws of the United States or of any state, appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation, etc. You guys have seen me use this slide before. The point is that Antifa definitely fits the bill. To which he replied, yeah, I might have read the definition once or twice. What policy goal is Antifa trying to coerce the government or civilian population into? To which I responded with some of my screenshots from different secret anarchist groups, more specifically those that were occupied by Antifa, including this one that describes them as Antifa globally as radical left, anarchist, communists, etc., etc. And I said, well, when you go on their private forums, they're pretty open about it. This one says, we need to abolish the police and overthrow the government. Whilst defunding the police sounds like it would work, it's more diplomacy than revolution, which always ends with more authoritarian bullshit we'll have to take care of in the future. Beau says, well, first, that's an ANCOM board, not Antifa, but let's pretend it is. Do their actions appear to intend to create this policy change? He really is going to go into a apologist mode for Antifa here, as if they don't openly talk about destroying the government on a regular basis. Kind of like the imagery on this flyer that they put out for their protest / destruction of a building. They actually attacked the DNC headquarters in Portland. Note the flaming White House in the background. Fuck the state, fuck Biden, land back, fuck 12, no streamers, no peace police. Yeah, these are people clearly with, no intention whatsoever of overthrowing the government. But of course, since I'm sure people are going to say I lied about that, here's video of Portland Antifa attacking the Democratic National Headquarters in Portland. And failing at breaking windows, I guess. Oh, they got it! Yay! Oh, let's see here. What does that fit under? To influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion. To affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction. Yeah, domestic terrorism. Let's see what else we got. What about July 3rd at the Wii Spa?
Pedophilia and being transgender have nothing to do with each other.
We come in peace. We come in peace. This is about the children. Hey, stop. This is about the children.
They're not the same. They're not the same. Transgender people are real people. You're fucking racist. What am I doing? Keep walking. Get his shit. Oh shit.
Or we could talk about that footage that was recently grabbed undercover by Drew Hernandez, wherein Black Bloc attacked and tortured a homeless man. And just in case anybody has any question as to what that was going on, here's Antifa members themselves calling it out for what it was. It is imperative that people in the bloc learn the difference between someone experiencing a mental health crisis and fash. Time and again, we have seen people in the bloc beat and mace mentally ill and houseless people who are escalated. This needs to stop. What about that time they stabbed somebody in LA recently? Or maybe we could mention that time that 100% Antifa Michael Reinhold walked up and shot a man dead in the street in Portland. Well, gee, that certainly looked a lot like intimidating or coercing a civilian population. I wonder what version of domestic terrorism he believes. Well, don't worry, we're going to read on and you're going to see him try to word salad Antifa out of being domestic terrorists. Now, going back to the Twitter conversation, you'll remember that he pointed out that that was an ANCOM board and not an Antifa board, even though obviously there were members of Antifa on it. But anyway, every person on that ANCOM board in that conversation is talking from the perspective of Antifa. When we were at Occupy, they openly admitted to destroying property in the hopes of creating a society collapse. You know, back before everyone tried to pretend they did not exist. To which Beau says, "So you were part of their protest and talked with them? Many would suggest it was the Occupy movement who did that. Is this an admission of domestic terrorism? In parentheses, this is why domestic groups can't be designated." To which I replied with a YouTube video that very clearly shows exactly what I was talking about. I'll share that here.
Peaceful protests by the Occupy Oakland movement were overshadowed this week by violent clashes between a small group of demonstrators and the police. Now there is concern among the majority of the protesters that their message is being hijacked. We asked John Blackstone to look into this.
It could be seen as a battle for the image of the Occupy movement. One demonstrator struggles to put out the flames of a burning barricade as others, masked and dressed in black, pull him away. It wasn't the only time during a huge Occupy demonstration in Oakland this week that protesters found themselves on opposite sides. When dozens of black-clad marchers began attacking a supermarket, others urged them to stop, finally linking arms to protect the store from further destruction. One demonstrator, Sheikh Anderson, distanced most of the protesters from the violence.
We called the mayor's office the moment we understood what was going on over there. That was an anonymous action. That was nothing to do with Occupy Oakland.
So as I've told you guys in many videos, we in the Occupy movement constantly had to put up with Antifa pulling bullshit like that, and it would harm our image. And as Ryan Chapman has pointed out on his channel, there's actually peer-reviewed studies that prove that peaceful protests are 50% effective, whereas violent ones are only about 25% effective. But that's a conversation for another time. Here he tries to twist the whole thing to suggest that somehow Occupy was domestic terrorists. He says, "So you knowingly provide a cover to domestic terrorists? This would be what's called an active sympathizer. If we designated groups, you'd be arrested." He says, "Here, let me help. Neither the Proud Boys nor Antifa is a domestic terrorist group because we don't do collective punishment. They engage in disorganized political violence. People with both ideologies have committed acts that could fall under terrorism umbrella but lack policy goals." He seems to have forgotten about the policies that I already exposed with the screenshots from the various secret Antifa groups, but anyway, he goes on to say, Proud Boys Proud Boy members participated in an attempted self-coup on the 6th. And I said, while I don't approve of what happened on the 6th either, pretending it was a coup is absurd. Even if they went total scorched earth and murdered senators that day, there was no chance the government was suddenly going to change hands. Seriously. To which he says, so suddenly the capability to achieve the goal comes into play? Where was that energy 4 posts ago? At this point, you've exposed yourself as an authoritarian goon, or maybe you've got a personal grievance. Either way, your opinion is compromised. To which I said, it wasn't a coup. They believed the election was fraudulent. They also believed that they were trying to prevent a fraudulent election from being ratified. There was no intention of displacing the government. At this point, I have said nothing that is authoritarian at all. To which he said, he says, yeah, you're a fash apologist. Knowingly or not, you're literally propagandizing. I'm not sure exactly how I'm engaging in propaganda by exposing when Antifa openly lies about things that are going on at their protests, but we'll get into more of that in a moment. Gonna blow up a little bit more of that here. He said, yeah, you're a fash apologist, knowingly or not, you're literally propagandizing. If you want to debate me, choose any topic other than political violence. To which I said, why should I choose another topic? It's funny that you say I must be authoritarian for disliking a group of thugs attacking people they don't agree with, and somehow spinning it in their heads that they are doing it in the name of anti-authoritarian values. Or that it's self-defense somehow. Anyway, I have also already laid out the policy goals. Antifa wants to abolish the police and overthrow the government. More of that same exchange. I said, I have no personal grievances. I am actually a leftist who is sick of Antifa and other violent activists discrediting us, which is literally all they have ever managed to accomplish. They make people more comfortable with draconian police state measures all the time. And then he says, strategy difference propagandists. In internet terms, it's called concern trolling. And then I pointed out, even actual anarcho-communists are starting to speak out about this, as their idiotic terrorism strategy is not making people feel that they don't need the state, at all. In fact, it's doing the opposite. He's, at this point, begins his rant suggesting that I'm engaging in propaganda even further. I go on to say, Antifa roving the streets, beating people for their political beliefs, burning and destroying property is literally the best thing for anyone who wants authoritarianism to take hold. He says, you may want to read a little bit about how security clampdowns work. And I said, let me guess, is Chris Hedges a fash apologist as well? In his article, The Cult of Violence Always Kills the Left. Chris Hedges is a flat-out leftist socialist who's been calling out Antifa on their stupidity for years and debated Mark Bray, the author of the Anti-Fascist Handbook. And he pointed out multiple times that the only way that these kinds of revolutions ever work is through peaceful protest, where you convince people that what you're doing is right and what the opposition is doing is wrong. That's how Martin Luther King operated. When you watched, videos or saw pictures of what happened to Martin Luther King and his people, it actually created sympathy for the cause. And it also made it very clear who the bad guys were. Really, the only way that these kinds of things can ever work is if you can peacefully get people to accept your ideas. And that actually means getting the acceptance of the police and the military, because you're not going to accomplish it by throwing bottles and destroying buildings, which actually just makes people not interested in your point of view. One of the things I pointed out when I was talking to Derek Jensen, who's also a longtime anarchist, and he agreed, was that this is perhaps the most poor way to convince people that they don't need the police and they don't need the state. Is just to go out and behave in such a fashion that literally makes people more interested in the police protecting them and more interested in the state. It's just idiotic. It doesn't work. So in response to my question as to whether or not Chris Hedges was also a quote-unquote fascist apologist, he then says, no, but you are. And I said, how? I oppose any group of thugs pretending they are hurting people in the name of political righteousness, and more people on the left are coming forward all the time. Sick of Antifa. As Matt Taibbi just pointed out, enough is enough. Antifa attacks reporter in Portland. People on the left are getting sick of Antifa. He goes on to accuse me further of being a propagandist, bandwagon propaganda, strategy difference propaganda. Now is when you jump to pure cause, right? And I said, what the hell are you talking about? He says, look, if you haven't read about dissemination of disruptive propaganda and aren't intentionally using these tactics, you missed your calling. To which I said, what part of what I am doing is disruptive propaganda? The part where I exposed that Antifa lied about the shooting in Portland? The part where I exposed the knife attack in LA? The part where I exposed the lie about the shooting that just happened? And he says, so all of your work is targeting a single entity with negative attention. I can't imagine why you'd be read as a propagandist. And I said, no, that's not all my work, which of course you guys already know. In his obsession with continually talking about me as supposedly being a propagandist, he says, look, if you haven't studied this and are just winging it, walk into the recruiters and tell them that you want to go to 37 Foxtrot because you're a natural. He says, you're going to be a general someday. To which I said, it's not propaganda to expose lies. You're basically just spitting out ad hominem at this point, which is personal attack. And he says, of course they're ad hom. That started with the whole authoritarian goon comment. I don't engage in good faith debate with people operating in bad faith. That would be silly. So at this point, he's lost because he's just going to start like throwing childish insults, and his smooth, calm demeanor that you see in all of his videos basically is exposed as just being horse shit. So I finished this debate with the following. There was nothing bad faith about my comments at all. Bad faith was suggesting that Antifa shot Jay Danielson in self-defense. Bad faith was suggesting that the knife attack in LA was self-defense. Bad faith was suggesting that Tiny shot himself in the foot. The real reason you were engaged in ad hom is the reason people typically do. Your position is indefensible, and you are well aware of that. Time to attempt to distract the audience with your personal attacks. Bad faith was suggesting that I am engaging in propaganda for exposing all of those issues. Bad faith is you making excuses for Antifa or trying to word salad them out of being domestic terrorists. So, I don't know if he's going to respond any more than that, but that was the finish of it. But I give you Beau of the Fifth Column, who's clearly a guy who is just hoping to slowly radicalize people with his demeanor and his production value, and he is getting a lot of attention, but the truth is he's a fraud. And obviously he has criminal history on top of it. I've heard that supposedly he's a former military contractor or something like that, but it doesn't really change what's going on here. He exposed himself in this Twitter conversation in a way that he doesn't typically do on his YouTube channel. And as I started to examine him more and more, I realized I was dealing with somebody that's full of shit. So, in any case, keep this in mind, folks. There are people out there that are doing exactly this, some of which have really big audiences. And I don't think anybody, for example, watching his channel would have assumed he was Antifa, but it's fairly clear, especially when he's saying shit like you're a fascist apologist or whatever the hell else he wants to say. Just using that terminology is kind of, all the exposure we need, but in any case, thanks for listening. I know this was a bit long, but I figured I would share this with you guys, and do me a favor and share this everywhere you see people posting Beau of the Fifth Column links, because I think there's some shit about him that people really need to know. Thanks. Like and subscribe, ring the bell, and please consider supporting me on Patreon. I am now getting closer to my goal. If I can get enough patrons, I'll be able to continue to do this kind of work with the research and the frequency that you are accustomed to. And I'm still working on content today. Thanks again for tuning in. You will find the link in my description of where you can support me on Patreon or Subscribestar if you want to support this work. I prefer Patreon. Subscribestar has kind of like a minimum before it'll pay out, but I didn't want to have to do this, but I'm now at a stage where I can't physically work without incredible pain, so I figured, well, I'll give it a try. If not, I'm going to continue to do my work, obviously, but it's going to be considerably less often, and I won't have anywhere near as much time for research. So if you want to continue to hear what you've been hearing, again, consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks again.